Welcome everyone to 12Petals Fireside Chat on entrepreneurship, running your own business and projects. So we're super excited to have our speakers with us, Owen, John, and Seth. So, hang on. Owen, he's a saxophonist and band leader based in New York City, with his own ensembles as well as groups such as the Annette Cohen Tentet and the Gil Evans Project. So Owen actively tours the US and Europe, including performances at Carnegie Hall, the Newport Jazz Festival, and Umbria Jazz Festival. And his albums have received critical acclaim with a 4-star review from Downbeat and earning him the title of 2018 Debut Artist of the Year, Francis Davis NPR. Conductor John Devlin is an ardent champion of American music, an innovator of concert design, and a thought leader in the field of classical music. Being the music director of the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra, John is he's only the 9th conductor in its 90-year history to hold that title, and at 35 is one of the nation's youngest music directors to lead a professional symphony orchestra. Seth Herman is an entrepreneur and advocate who has spent his career building and bringing people together and finding new audiences for community-focused ideas. Seth founded the Rootfire Cooperative, the first record label in the world to provide musicians with interest-free microloans for the production and marketing of recorded music. Seth is also the founder of High Tour Gear Exchange, a company that gives Charlottesville community access to high-quality used outdoor gear and clothing, and to create an avenue for participation in the circular economy. So thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you all for attending this live session. So we have a lot to unpack here, and I was wondering, we can start off with, can you guys tell us about your most important business or project, and what role do you play in it, and why it was so important for you or for the project to exist? So anyone can take this. Owen?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for facilitating this and bringing us all together. What an incredible cast of characters you've assembled. I'm super excited to hear what John and Seth have to say. What impressive people you are. So I think one of the more important projects for me in the trajectory of my career so far, and like in terms of how it kind of set me up for what I've been doing, was my American Roots project, which is an ensemble that recorded an album called Heritage in 2018. And in a lot of ways, that was kind of when a lot of different pieces of my career kind of came together in an important way for me. Up to that point, I had been playing with peers of mine who I, some of whom I went to college with, and I continue to play with these people, and they're wonderful musicians. And just as in any kind of business, as a freelance musician, you're kind of in the business of yourself, right? You're kind of you have to think about moving yourself forward. And so this project, for this project, I recruited some veterans of the music, some people who are far more experienced than I was and am. And by surrounding myself with these people who have been doing what I want to do for a very, very long time, for decades, I was able to experience what a rehearsal looks like on their, you know, in that community, and what a recording, like how a recording session is supposed to operate when you're dealing with people of that caliber, like what they expect. And so kind of getting familiar with their expectations of the rehearsal process, of the recording session process, and of a performance situation, you know, that was eye-opening for me. I learned a lot about how to treat my fellow musicians. You know, you can't all, you know, it kind of became less of asking my friends to do these favors of playing with me and playing my music and, you know, that kind of thing. And it kind of put things in perspective in terms of this is how people do what we're trying to do. This is how they run their business. And so that was eye-opening for me, and an incredible opportunity for me to kind of see that world through that lens.
Owen's album is amazing. I was listening to Cripple Creek, that tune with headphones with my feet up on the wall about an hour ago, just like diving into it. It's an amazing album.
Thank you, man. Thank you for listening.
Oh yeah, I was really excited to. You know, you touched on a couple of things that are pretty interesting. It's like when you're a musician, or most likely when you work in the music industry, you're a freelancer. And the way that was empowering when I was younger and scary as I got older. The way I kind of define freelance is if I'm not working, the work is not getting done. Another thing that you touched on was the importance of shipping something, meaning to create a product and actually put it out there. That's kind of what changed my life. I managed bands for a long time right out of college, and earlier today I was at the University of Virginia speaking to an entrepreneurship class, and they were what I kind of leaned into is like business and entrepreneurship is a posture, meaning we embody it and we bring it with us. So whether you're a musician and you're running your own business, or you transition that into a different career, the skills are kind of the same. The greatest contribution that I've probably had in music, I started this record label that was based on microloans. So the idea was, rather than you sign a deal with a record label and they manage your project and they put money into marketing, we would fund that, manage your project, put money into marketing, and let you keep 100% of the sales of your record once you paid back the investment. The first artist we did that with, we put $50,000 into their album, and that was about 5 years ago. And that artist at the time was playing clubs in front of maybe 100 or 200 people. And this year they actually sold out Red Rocks in Colorado during COVID, and they've made hundreds of thousands of dollars on that album. Now, we were only privileged, excuse me, it was a privilege to be able to work on that project, but the only way that it was really possible was because I had worked in the industry for 10 years and I started to understand the challenges with record labels, and I knew a lot of people and I had a lot of trust. But without that experience, we never would have been able to try to do that. I would be disappointed in myself if I didn't say that maybe the biggest impact I'm having right now is actually in my current job, where I work with different municipalities and public schools around the Mid-Atlantic region, bringing solar to schools. And so I work with superintendents and school boards. We basically put solar on schools and sell them the electricity cheaper than they could buy from the utility. It was a really amazing experience to try to learn how to take what I did in music and turn it into a different career. And so I'm certainly happy to answer questions or talk about that. That was a really hard process. And I thought it couldn't be done, but it was everything I did in music that allowed me to get to have the job I have now.
It's so wonderful. Thank you also, Owen and Seth, to be here with you, and Christina for the invitation tonight. I am an orchestral conductor, and so a lot of what you're saying resonates with me about the entrepreneurial skills that we need to bring to bear to make our organizations be the best that they can be. There are a lot of folks and their pathway is their own, and it makes total sense that if this is your interest, that maybe you're just a conductor and you have a staff that's able to fill in the different gaps that exist in an organization to help support you. But I think that we could all probably agree that we're better off if we at least have an understanding of what everyone on our teams are doing, can be empathetic as coworkers and as leaders within the organization. And maybe even we're going to find it very useful to be able to do a lot of that work on our journeys. So what I would say to answer Christina's question is that I was part of a team in Washington, D.C. that started an organization called Gourmet Symphony. And the name kind of gives it away. We paired food experiences with musical ones, and that could range from free concerts at soup kitchens and food banks, all the way up to we worked with Joshua Bell and the National Symphony. And I was one of those kind of, go get 'em people where I was the executive director and the artistic director and the president of the board because my business card had enough space to fill all those things in there. But that was the place where I had a lot of successes in terms of building a product, making an artist, and building a team around that. And it's also a place where.
Sorry, you got broken up a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Time someone else is speaking, just let me know. And what ended up happening there was we achieved a lot of success, and I made a lot of good decisions. I made a lot of bad decisions, but I'm sure that with all of the people on this call being relatively young, that we have a lot of journey ahead of us, and we're going to be able to learn the bring those gifts to bear and also correct some of the things that I know I could do better on that path. And entrepreneurialism has been the defining factor that I think has allowed me to get to where I am today, where I do have the ability to make some artistic decisions for the good of this community.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that. So I'm very curious, like all this entrepreneurial spirit that you guys have. Is there any point of time in your life, let's say even back to childhood, that you observe this mindset developing? Because I think it's pretty, it almost seems like everything is connected, right? And we're always trying to project what we value the most and bring it into our craft, everything that we do in our daily lives. So is there a time, or is there something back in your childhood, that you find commonality in how you look at the world, how you're curious, and to share those moments with us? Yeah. Owen?
Well, yeah, sure. I'm happy to start, but if you want to go in reverse order, we could do that too.
Sure. Go ahead. Whichever.
All right. So for me, my mom, her whole career was in arts administration, and it was in a variety of positions. For a few years, she was working as the director of development for a kind of more traditional art museum, and then she was the director of a contemporary art museum, and then she ended up being the vice president of the Baltimore Symphony at their Strathmore venue. And I mean, in her career and also just in life, she's an organizational minded person, or organization minded person. I mean, just never let time pass without being active in one way or another. And I definitely, inherited, whether by nurture or by nature, and I inherited some of that. In that, I do not like to wait around for things to happen. And another kind of formative experience tied to this, I think, is in college, my class had 6 saxophonists, 6 jazz saxophonists in it. I was one of 6. And there are only so many bands you can form that need saxophonists. So, I was watching my friends get picked to be part of these different extracurricular bands. Friends would put together groups. And, if I wasn't in a band for a while, I'd get antsy. And so I wanted to start something. So, in college, I started a soul band that lasted for a few years. I started a saxophone quartet, just something that gave me an opportunity to do what I wanted to do, which was play music with my peers. That kind of showed, even in college, in the safety of a college campus, I kind of learned how to just, if I'm free, make my own music, If I'm not participating in someone else's band, start one. Find a way to do what you want to do.
John?
Sure. For me, it was when I was in graduate school, it came time to figure out a dissertation topic. And I looked around and said, everyone else that's a conductor that I know that has done that has chosen to write a big paper on Sibelius' Second Symphony or Brahms's Third Symphony. And I said, well, I want to conduct those, but the things that I've learned that have found me on podiums have been everything else, the entrepreneurial skills. So what I did was I wrote my dissertation on entrepreneurship in music. And Seth, it made me interested to hear you say that the University of Virginia had a music entrepreneurship class that you're at today, because when I did this dissertation back in 2015, there were only 6 schools around the country that were offering a minor or a major in entrepreneurship, and very, very few other than that even offered a class at all. The University of Maryland, where I went, included. So right down the road from Strathmore. And so I said, why don't I go to each of these schools, work with the faculty for a week, learn what their best practices are. And all of them said, I love what we have designed in this way. I really wish if we could start it all over, we could do it this way. So then what I did with my paper was say, I took the amalgamation of all of that stuff I learned and said, it sounds like these 6 experts would love to set up a program like this. And I designed that in the paper. And I'll tell you what, just like thinking along those lines has made for me all these new pathways that I never thought would exist. And it's allowed me to write better grants for the organizations that I was standing behind or perhaps on the podium for. Think creatively about how we can design concerts, how we can market them, how we can find new audiences. And, when you go into an application process against 300 other conductors, or like you might in an orchestra audition process, or if you're applying to be an administrator, you have to find ways to stand out, because basically the people that apply to a specific type of job are going to have specific skill sets that are similar to yours. So how do you stand out? I think for me, it's partly because I have that entrepreneurial mindset that everyone on this call is talking about. And that's the type of thing that can impress decision makers, because in my field, the people that hire conductors are often bankers, lawyers, politicians, usually not other conductors, because they're on the board, right? So that's what I found. And then, I can come in and actually say to an orchestra, you're having a budget problem, I can help you fix that and conduct Brahms really well. And that served me quite nicely.
I wasn't at a music entrepreneurship class. It was a social entrepreneurship class. So UVA sadly probably still does not have a music entrepreneurship class. I think I got into entrepreneurship because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't know necessarily what it felt like to fail, because I yeah, and what I mean by that sort of sounds pretentious. I grew up in a really tiny town. I graduated with like 50 kids. And so we were all kind of, I didn't know what else was out there. There was no other school to compare it to. There, my parents' jobs were similar to everybody else's job. It was just a rural part of the country. And so I had no kind of comparison for what success looks like and what failure looks like. It's just, we all were kind of doing it. But one thing that did happen that gave me confidence in music was, we had a music festival in the town, and the woman who booked all the bands was a friend of my mom, and she would let me dig through all the old press packs. And so it'd be like VHS tapes and black and white photos from bands in the mid 90s. And every year she would let me pick one band that could play at the festival. And I think I was 12. And I picked some cool bands, and I got to see like what press was and what marketing material was. And she kind of let me pick bands all the way until I went to college. And then I went to school in Vermont, and I actually would hear bands at clubs and be like, you got to go play this festival in upstate New York. Around that time, one of my friend's bands was just touring through, and I said, I could book you a gig. So I booked them a show at a coffee shop, and they made $30. It was like pass the hat. But there was a woman in the audience that was part of like the school board who could bring bands to the college. And she said, you brought them here? Like, could you get them to play at, whatever the hall was? And I said, sure. So I actually had a contract from one of those festival shows, from a band, and I literally like crossed their name out, and I like put our band's name on top of it. And I think she gave us a gig for $1,800, which was like so much money. I mean, like game changer. It's like a joke, because the band would never make that much in a year playing coffee shops on their own. So I didn't know what I didn't know. And after that happened, the band was like, oh, you should be our manager. And it just kind of never stopped, Now, all of that said, a lot of times when I look back at the decisions we made, I didn't have health insurance till I was probably like 30, and I didn't know what a 401k was, and I didn't know what it felt like to live without credit card debt. I mean, there's a lot of challenges for a really long time that if I would have known how hard it would have been, I don't know if I could have tried, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That's amazing. I think, tracing back to where all this came from, there's a lot of courage and just the desire to know the unknown. That's a big driving force for all of your projects and businesses. And on the flip side, I would like us to dig in a little bit more about, the imposter syndrome. So has there, when you first started out, or with any of your different projects, how strong was that fear and that imposter syndrome? But also in what ways has it served you the best, in your journey? So, Seth, would you like to start? We can go back.
Sure, sounds good. I wanted to be validated that I was a professional. And so to me, validation meant that I would get a job offer from a music management company. And so I ended up moving to Charlottesville because there's a really big management company here. And so to answer your question on like imposter syndrome, I think I didn't lean into to owning the work I was doing, because I was waiting for someone else to pick me and say, oh, you're good enough to join our company. And so actually, yeah, and also maybe this is sort of interesting. So when I did start my own company, we had a logo that people liked, and randomly a guy in a band wore it on stage in Germany, and I got an email from India from someone that said, I want to buy that shirt. And so I put these t-shirts up for sale, and it was just with the logo, and it said in the description was like, well, I know what it was. You couldn't buy the shirt. You could only put your name and address, and I'd mail it to you. And then if you wanted to send a check, you could send a check. And I mean, that's like definition of imposter syndrome. I was afraid to take money because I didn't think I deserved it, you know? But the interesting thing that happened with that is we started shipping a CD with the shirt that had been sent to a record label, like by an unsigned band. And there was a little note that was like, this musician wanted somebody to hear this. Like, it deserves to be heard. Check it out. Let them know where you heard about it. And so we kind of ended up launching this brand because of imposter syndrome. And the interesting thing about it is that was what made us successful, was that we were sort of open to supporting good music and good arts, and it ended up becoming like a lifestyle blog, not a music management company, because I didn't think I was a professional manager. So ironically, it was a positive thing, but it always made me feel like the little person in a room until eventually I just had been in the room long enough that I wasn't the little person anymore. Yeah.
Owen, would you like to share? Oh, you're muted.
So, you know, for me, like, imposter syndrome has always hit hardest on stage, you know, playing. That's like where I feel most vulnerable. And for whatever reason, you know, the entrepreneurial side of things for me I've just kind of been in situations that have felt comfortable. And maybe that's just because that's like not my, like I'm a music, you know, I play, playing is kind of my priority, and entrepreneurship is kind of in service of that for me. And so playing is where I feel most vulnerable. That's where I feel like I have, that's where judgment means the most to me. And so that's where the imposter syndrome kind of really kicks in for me. But that said, you know, in the context of being a band leader, there are, imposter syndrome kind of comes out in a different way. And I think it's kind of benefit, you asked how imposter syndrome serves us. And I think it served me, and it continues to serve me in band leading situations, in that if I feel something is inadequate, I'm kind of vibing in on either making that specific thing better, or if I can't, finding other ways to make the situation balanced. I like to talk about the rule of three, a lot when I'm talking to young students about, how to evaluate an opportunity, a performing opportunity. Young people are always asking about, well, how do you know if it's a good gig? So I think the rule of three that I subscribe to is like, if it's got good money, good people, and good music, then it's a good gig. And if it's got two of the three, then you're in good shape. Any combination of the two or of the three, if you've got two, then you're in good shape. And so, as I'm in a band leader role, I'm kind of paying attention to those three factors. And if, sometimes I'm leading a project where I haven't written the music, and sometimes the music isn't always great. So I try to make sure if the music isn't great, that they're getting paid well and that the vibe is cool. Like they're playing with people that are have similar dispositions, and it's a socially cool place to be.
Yeah, and it's humbling to hear the vulnerability that we're sharing here, because we don't often talk publicly about imposter syndrome, but I know this is something that I've always struggled with and continue to struggle with. It's very humbling, especially as a young artist, to be given the podium and the baton and told, hey, you can tell these professional musicians, many of whom have been in this orchestra longer than you've been alive, how to play better. Um, and it's been something that's been difficult for me, and I think I leaned on the entrepreneurship side of things as a younger artist as kind of a crutch against that, like, oh well, if I can come up with a new idea or a cool project design or something they've never seen before, that might hide any sort of musical deficiency that they detect from, you know, the podium. And it's been a process for me to kind of repair that feeling and think, not the entrepreneurship is a strength, but every conductor needs to bring musical skills, administrative skills, leadership skills, team building skills to bear. And that's why I feel so comfortable as a music director primarily, rather than a guest conductor, because I work with the same team every day and I live in the community where I'm making music, and I can do all of those things and then really enjoy the concert weeks, because I can design artistic projects that fit who I am and invest in artists and composers that I want to share with our community. So it's certainly something that I think we all feel, especially as performers, as Owen was talking about. That's the most vulnerable place, especially when we're doing it in front of other people we respect and audiences that have paid to be there to hear us perform. So the thing I'll just say as a piece of advice that I found very helpful was I actually started working with a career coach. And that has been one of the wisest investments I've made in myself. It's expensive. It was a difficult decision to make, but being able to go to somebody every week and talk to them about these concerns and feelings and have them come back and empower you through some of those conversations has been extremely valuable to me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I do think that, you know, somehow with you guys, you know, there's a similarity in how you guys leverage what we call imposter syndromes or any of this, you know, insecurities that you feel, but, you know, complementing it to give you fuel for what you want to do in your daily life. And John was talking about the advice, you know, for you going to a career coach. It's one of the, you know, best things that you can do to keep you going. And I was also wondering, what is the best advice that you have gotten with regards to entrepreneurship or anything related?
Sure. I think the most important advice I would give, and this is just something that I find to be true, I'm sure for everyone there's different pathways that can be more successful, is that I've struggled to do this, but when I did, it was a huge moment for me, was to define myself proudly. And usually that meant for me taking the thing I cared the most about and attaching it very, very carefully to the thing I cared the second most about. Because if you just say, I care about being a conductor, every single person you are competing against for positions has that as their top priority. But as soon as you say, I'm going to be a conductor that supports living American composers, or innovation in concert design, or investing in community partnerships, all of a sudden you start to create a path for yourself that's uniquely your own. And so here in Wheeling, I looked at the community before I applied to this job and said, it's a place where they're surrounded by lots and lots of orchestras with European music directors. It's a place that cares deeply about its roots as an Appalachian, Ohio Valley, Americana type of place. And the previous music director focused a lot on the traditional canon of repertoire. So this seems like a place that I could come in and be a little different in good ways, a little bit similar in other good ways to what had come before, and take that leap. So I defined my argument as an applicant, and I continue to define it as the person that holds the job as somebody that does those things. American composers, innovative concert design, and giving a voice to our musicians who are in the orchestra. They program concerts, including masterworks. They play as soloists. They can contribute ideas that I have long conversations with them every month about what they want to see on our stage. And those things have become calling cards. Now, if I step aside for a moment, I also care deeply about conducting Brahms and Shostakovich. But for this time in my life, for what I can bring to bear for this job, taking those ideas and stating them very clearly over and over again, every time I'm asked what my priorities are here, that's served me really well.
Seth, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. John, that was awesome. It's so, by adding that extra level of defining who you are, you just separated yourself, and you're memorable, and it's like, I want to talk to that person. I don't know if I always, when I managed bands, I felt like it was really good to know what genre we were and own that genre, versus being like 5 or 6 genres, and then it's like, if you try to be for everybody, you're for nobody. That was like something that was kind of helpful. The best piece of advice was probably one of the hardest lessons to learn, and that was to take time to celebrate when you're well, just leave it at that. I think I know one of the reasons I left the music industry was because I didn't take time to celebrate. There was a moment when I was like having a bucket list life experience. We were on tour in New Zealand, and I was tour managing a band, and I'd worked so hard to make that tour happen. It literally reached out to a band from New Zealand, invited them to the US, said we'd give them backline and good pay, and could they do the same for us in New Zealand? And it worked. And we had the day off, and we had the opportunity to go like on a beautiful hike to this river that just appeared out of the ground, out of the middle of nowhere. And all the musicians were going to go. And I stayed back in this little cabin to type up a day sheet that told the musicians where the next day, where they could get dinner, and how to get to the hotel from the club. Because I was probably scared to just celebrate the moment and what we were doing. And when I look back on my career in the music industry, it's full of a lot of happy times, but it's not full of enough joyful times. And to realize there's a difference between the two. And so now I try really hard to find the ways to feel joy in the work we're doing, and to make sure that the people around me also feel that.
Yeah, those were both amazing answers. Yeah. I'm taking notes over here. Yeah, I mean, my thoughts were, I think, very much along the same lines as John's, which for me boils down to being intentional. Knowing why you're making the choices you're making about how you're structuring your career, whether it's like, making, starting a new business or a new project or a new ensemble, whatever the new venture is, just understanding how it functions in the context of the rest of your activities and your long-term goals. Even if it's a short-term project, why are you doing it? How does this position you better for the next project? And so just being intentional down to who you're working with in it. You know, if it's an ensemble, are you going to play one show? Are you going to record an album? Is this going to be your vehicle as a composer, or is this supposed to position you in a new network of musicians? You know, I mean, there's so many different motivations to start something new. So many great motivations to start something new. And I think it's important to be intentional about what your motivations are, where you see them going, and how what you're doing now is going to position you to, you know, pursue the next project.
Thank you. It's very humbling to hear what you guys are sharing, and along the lines of, you know, being intentional, because everyone comes to the table with the best intentions. But also sometimes in the process, we're all humans, we all make mistakes, right? So I'd love to tap into how, and what was the biggest mistake you guys have made and acknowledged, and what have you learned from it with regards to any projects or in your career? Owen, would you like to go?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a tough question among this crowd, because, you know, Seth and John, you know, what everyone on this call are continuing to do good things, great things. And, you know, a mistake is just you know, I mean, the biggest cliche is, you know, a mistake is just an opportunity to learn. It's a learning experience, but that's true. And so clearly no one here has made a career-ending mistake, you know, and you know, that said, we've all made, I'll speak for myself. I've made plenty of mistakes, some that I can't remember because they're so small and insignificant, and some that are huge to me. And the people who I think I've wronged could not care less about it. And then, you know, there's so many different kinds of mistakes. And ultimately, it's just kind of how you bounce back from them. And you know, the simplest way of saying is learn from them, right? But how do you build it into your next business plan? How do you build whatever mistake you just made into the next thing that you do? And then you know, move forward with that in mind. That's my best shot.
Thanks, John. The mistakes, what I consider the biggest mistake is when I hurt someone. And those are the ones that last the longest for me, and the ones that I want to repair. So a couple of things happened. There was people that we stopped working together, booking agents or business managers or just different people. And I ended those relationships. And so I actually called all of those people last year, you know, kind of one after the other, to just say I was sorry. And I guess I wasn't that I was surprised, but they were all actually really happy to hear from me. And it was like a huge weight off my shoulder. They weren't holding on to these feelings. They weren't thinking about it. It was me that was thinking about it. And so it was nice to be able to do that for myself and to just have kind of closure. The probably biggest one that took a really long time to heal, because I was so unaware of it, was when I left the music industry. My wife was pregnant. I decided that as a dad, I wanted to have to do work here that my kids could actually see, as opposed to I was always traveling, and we really didn't do any shows around where I'm at. So I just told my wife, I'm gonna stop doing this. I'm gonna find a new career. I don't know what it's gonna be. and I introduced a lot of insecurity into our world, right? Where are we going to get an income from? What's it going to be like to have a baby? Like, what am I going to do in the future? And that was sort of a selfish move on my part to think about myself as opposed to my family, and what she might be going through. And the reason it was so hard of a lesson was I just kind of did what I always did, which was listen to my gut and make a decision. But this time, being married with a kid, it was different, and I just didn't realize that. So it's taken a few years to work through and learn more about that. And our relationship is stronger because of it, and I'm a better, husband and dad because of it. But that was a pretty tough one to put my wife through for sure.
Yeah, Seth, that's so thoughtful to hear, and I think mine is related with just any situation where I put the work above the people. It's so easy to do when you're a leader, especially if you're in charge of a project, to think it's my job to drive people to do their best. And oftentimes, if we are leaders, as it sounds like everyone on this call has found themselves in that type of position, it's because we're so driven, and it's a mistake, I think, to assume everyone else could or should be that way. And so the thing that I'm trying to do here and in the project that I have with a few of my colleagues called Everything Conducting is to say, how can I be the same amount of a productive leader while empowering and celebrating everybody and being the type of person that people can come to when they have a problem that's interfering with their success as a worker, and being understanding of all of those types of conversations. And that just comes, I think, from being, if you are a leader, being the person that always does what he or she says they are going to do, and doing so with empathy and being dependable. And then that gives you the platform when you have to demand something from somebody else, that you are certainly always doing the types of things you're asking others to do. And then also being such a good person that when there's an interference or something that's a dissonance in their life that's causing them difficulties, that they feel like they can come to you at all times. So I just constantly spend meetings talking to other people about the great things that they're doing, and then if we need a correction at some point along the way, that's okay too. But I've made mistakes in my past where I haven't had that alignment of priorities, and I would go back and change those moments.
Thank you for sharing on this vulnerable moment. Do you guys have any questions for each other or anyone from the live session participants? We're open to questions now. And I think while you guys can type it in the chat, but also just for our listeners as well, because some of the most difficult barriers to overcome is how do we brand what we want to do, and how do we, the technical aspects of fundraising, funding. So what do you guys think are the top 3 things anyone who wants to, step into a different project that they need in order to start any type of idea or project? And with regards to funding, what are some of the ways that you guys have found effective, and what are some of the steps that anyone can take?
I went last time. I'm happy to kind of continue the recycling of the order. You asked so many great questions within there, and I think 2 things stuck out in my mind that I could share based on what you said, and then I'll let everyone else certainly fill in the many gaps that I will no doubt leave. You talked about branding, and I already gave my advice about find the thing that, yes, is the thing that everyone assumes is true about you if you are a conductor or a band leader, or a tour manager. But the real thing for me was how difficult it is to give up the things you're saying that you're not when you do that branding. Because I think we all think, and probably rightly so, we can do a lot of things. And Seth, you talked about like not being 5 or 6 genres. You know, it's like, well, I can play Tchaikovsky and Adams and Telemann, so why would I not tell everybody I could do any of those gigs? And I think that goes away with time, but also can go away with intention if we think about it in that way. Like, I'm okay with these sacrifices because this is what I care about the most. And it takes real, thoughtful conversation with yourself and those that you trust and love around you to come to those things. And it can't happen while you're doing your day-to-day work. You have to create space to think about these things from a wider angle. And that's hard to find time in our lives to do that. So I encourage people to do that. And then from the financial standpoint, I think the best thing that you can do is go to the other side of the table if you can. I got better at applying to jobs when I figured out what impressed me when I could look at applications. I got more grants when I started serving on the DC Commission Arts and Humanities grant panel and reviewing other people's grants, because I was in the room where those financial decisions were being made. How does the scoring work? What are the types of things people who understand this business think about when they're making these decisions? And then I'll say this a little bit more quietly, but most people don't understand a thing about looking at a budget or looking at a 3-year plan. And how do you impress those people? Because you have to do that too. And the thing it came down to for me was being an excellent communicator. Can you articulate what you believe about yourself well in a way that shows how it will do good for others? And those are the types of people that get funding from grant committees, that get funding from donors, and that will have people who are in our artistic community willing to work for you at the beginning for maybe less pay than they would expect eventually because they love your project. And those are a couple pieces of advice from things that I've lived through.
Thinking about branding and applying for grants, I think it kind of comes down to the same idea, which is you're really doing all of this for the other person to feel good. And what I mean by that is good branding or good copywriting or a good bio makes the other person feel good about their time that they're investing in you. And so if someone's going to consider listening to your album, you know, do what Owen did and do like, there's like I think an NPR logo right on the website with a quote. So it's like, okay, well, NPR has already figured out this is good. So now I can spend my time listening to it. And you made it one thing easier for the other person. Same with John. I think it was like, yeah, Joshua Bell and then TED Talk, you know, and like, I watched your TED Talk. It was killer. Like, it was so cool how you talked about entrepreneurship and how it specifically affects, you know, people. You basically gave a gift to the audience of, well, you can trust me because I did a TED Talk and I'm going to teach you something. So you actually now have, you know, have a gift. You know, people talk, I'm not a musician, by the way. I don't know how to play music, but people talk about good music as knowing what not to play, knowing when to take space, knowing when to let someone else lead and how to stand back. And I think that goes a long way in general in life, you know.
Space. That's a great one. Yeah, you know, this idea of putting yourself in the shoes of who you're trying to communicate with, you know, I think extends to all aspects of what we're talking about here. You know, John came at it from grants, you know, the perspective of grants and jobs, and you know, I'm kind of thinking about there's So I'd actually be very curious to hear about Seth's record label that very uniquely invests in the artists. That's unheard of today. The record label that kind of has been making a splash in the jazz community in a certain way is Artist Share. And they have kind of taken this idea of communicating with your audience in a different way. To make an album, you need capital. Seth has miraculously found a way to support the musicians up front, and that's remarkable. Artist Share, the way that they've kind of navigated finding funding for their artists is to help them facilitate building a community that's not only investing in this project, but they're investing in you as an artist, so that once they buy into this project, this one album that you're making, it's not that they are interested in this album, they're interested in you, so that they'll be on your mailing list and interested in the music that you're making and the process of making this music for all of the albums that you make. The way that this is structured is, like Kickstarter, your audience can kind of buy in and get rewards based on the different levels. But with Artist Share, these rewards, not that Kickstarter isn't, but these in Artist Share, they have to be very meaningful and like long-term gifts. Something that really kind of creates an experience for your community. So it's not a mug that you put in the shelf, right? It's an explanation of why this piece is on the record and why, like what you were thinking about as you were writing it, or come sit in at a rehearsal with us and watch us rehearse this music. So it's, you create an experience in the making of the album so that the experience goes beyond the CD that they buy or download or whatever, and that's a way that you kind of get people to really believe in what you're doing and want to know what the next thing is and want to be a part of that. They want to be a part of what you're doing, not just the end result. So that's just kind of coming back to thinking about what the people you're trying to communicate with want from you and what makes it a meaningful experience for them.
Yeah, and Owen, I know you had this project live from the living room.
Live from our living room, right?
Yeah, so that has garnered over $140,000 of donations. Could you share a little bit more about that, and why did you think it was so successful and helpful during the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. March 13th, 2020, every one of our friends, just watched their calendars get wiped clean. And just as fast as gigs were getting canceled, I watched friends of mine start to throw up live stream concerts from our homes. It was the best we could do. No one even had microphones at that point. It was just whatever came with the computer. And so I watched this happen, and the more that happened, the more people were donating to one cause or another. Music Cares, through the Recording Academy, had a very impactful fundraiser and grant distribution mechanism to support artists who had lost all of their work. And that was just one of many organizations who was supporting artists through the pandemic. And so a friend of mine I saw just started a Tapan Serentip. She's one of the organizers of Live from Our Living Rooms. I saw her on her Instagram feed. She was posting about, you know, a fundraiser that she was starting just on her own, like a personal GoFundMe. Just donate as much as you can, if it's $5 or whatever, and I'm going to personally distribute this money to people I know who need it. And so I kind of saw the need for gigs and the need for you know, pandemic support. And I thought, why don't we just put all of these people who are already doing these live streams from their homes, let's just put them all under one umbrella and get everyone kind of motivated behind a single cause. And, you know, in 7 days, we got some of the biggest names in jazz to care about this, because it was easy to care about. People, you know, we were all going through something very familiar. The audience, you know, people who don't play music were missing music. People who play music were missing playing. And so that was, you know, an easy message to push. And so, you know, people like Christian McBride and John Patitucci and Bill Frisell all just kind of volunteered. They played for free for an hour. And we just watched people invest in the music community, because they knew, you know, they knew what was being lost for everyone. And so after that first 7-day festival, we basically replicated that with the DC Jazz Festival and supported DC musicians. And then, you know, then we were in July, and that's when typically summer camps happen, you know, music camps. All the kids go out to music camps, and that wasn't happening. So we tried to adapt what we had already done to offer an educational experience. And so we had, you know, we employed over 120 musicians, giving them, you know, performance opportunities and teaching opportunities, where they would either be speaking to, you know, any number of people, you know, there was no cap, but there were also these kind of more intimate master classes or kind of instrument specific workshops on each of the primary jazz instruments, where at most 20 people could be in a room with a jazz legend, speaking to them face to face. You know, I mean, you can't do that outside of the pandemic. You know, I mean, you could be talking to someone in California or in Singapore. You know, I mean, we kind of explored this way of creating a jazz camp using what we had, and again, it just kind of was people needed it, on both sides, all sides, and so you know, people care about music. That was what I took away from that experience. You know, that was the most obvious indicator that, you know, people care about music and the music makers. And, you know, that brought us to $140,000 that was able to, you know, give these musicians work. And also we distributed 80, you know, COVID relief grants.
It's amazing, incredible work, you know, and I think the very heartwarming and touching moment through all this process is just that, you know, like what you said, people care and people need music, and that keeps all of us going. We have 2 questions. So one of them is, if 12Petals had been available to you as a mentee, in what ways do you think it could have helped you and been valuable to your career? Anyone can take this.
All
I
right.
just monologued for 5 minutes, so I can't go.
I'm certainly happy to jump in because, you know, I'm so motivated by the mission of 12Petals, which is just to say, like, we all know how to use Zoom and know how to communicate with people in time zones that might be 12 away from our own now. And there are people all over the place who are generous with their knowledge and their time. And what a beautiful thing Christina and her team are doing to try to connect people that need that resource to people that have that resource. And I know that one of the things that musicians are really good at is making friends with the people that they are around. But what's a little bit harder is to make friends with the people that are maybe 10 or 15 years older than you, who are where you would like to be in 10 or 15 years, that really want to invest back into people who are 10 or 15 years younger. And I think that what this community has done is it's united people that do feel that way and want to give back, even if we don't feel like our careers have reached the pinnacle of where we are going to be. But it's still such a healthy thing to be able to think back and return that advice. And so for me, what I wish I would have had, like I have one friend of mine who's 9 years older that constantly helps me navigate problems that he's faced before that I haven't faced yet, or I'm facing for the first time now. And so to have somebody through 12Petals that I could pick specifically because they are in that situation and I'm about to face it for the first time, that's where I would really love to take advantage of that service. I know that for other people, they may be trying to get better at the violin, and then you're looking for a violin teacher. They have that too. But there's also people that I think can talk about, we're in an entrepreneurial discussion here. That's the type of thing too, that so many people in maybe areas you would expect or not expect could help.
When I finally found a mentor in the music industry, I had already been kind of in the industry for a few years. And I remember that person telling me, okay, you've been like cruising like this, like what, it's not going to be easy. And the kind of feedback I'm going to give you is going to be constructive criticism, but we want to take your experience and we really want to ratchet it up. And we want to make a lot more growth in a shorter period of time. And we did. And without someone who could kind of do two things. One is like prevent me from going down all the wrong paths when I don't need to, because there's sometimes you should go down the wrong paths. And then help me to see my blind spots, and then to validate where I was doing well, that I didn't have anybody around me that could say, you're actually pretty good at this. You could do this on your own. You don't need to get hired and do it for somebody else to be a professional. Like you're already on the right track. It's hard to find that validation, especially if the people immediately around you haven't had that experience. And a mentor can help you really understand how you can level up and make it work.
Yeah, you know, just like both John and Seth have said, you know, having someone who's available to care about your next steps is an invaluable experience. Seth and John have both said that they have mentors. I have a mentor, and you know, they're people who, you know, I think we would each consider them friends, you know, and I consider mine a good friend, and it's so helpful just to bounce ideas off, just because you never know how something's going to land. You know, you have such a clear thing in your head, and then you say it out loud, and maybe it doesn't land the way that you hoped, or more ideas come. Or, you know, you have something in your head and you missed an angle that's going to just make it really blossom. And just being able to kind of say these things out loud to someone who cares about your next steps, I think, is just critical, really.
Thank you. And our next question is, what are some skill sets musicians should start picking up or taking courses in to help prepare them? in taking up entrepreneurship?
So I went to school and studied community development and applied economics, which essentially at the time meant how can small businesses be used to do good? In those classes, there was jazz musicians from UVM who were also really interested in this. They were interested in different cultures and different experiences. And I remember we would take these like study abroad trips, and they would go for sort of the music side of things. So to understand local music, but they were always keenly aware that as a musician themselves, they were an entrepreneur. They were the ones that had to look out and run a business. And having been, sort of part of the industry for about 20 years, it was those artists back then that were 18, 19, 20 years old that kind of got it. They realized that they were a business, that are still around right now doing it professionally, and able to support themselves and a family. It's the musicians who did it for the like short-term kind of partying and club life and going on tour, and I don't want to think about a thing. The team I hired, you take care of me. It's really those bands that aren't doing anything or aren't together anymore. A good friend of mine just let a band go, and one of the reasons he said was the musicians never could understand that they were business owners, and I was tired of babysitting them. And so it's a lesson to learn early that will serve you really well.
I think emailing is a pretty great skill to start working on. Knocking on people's doors and not, being afraid to resend in a week, and then resend the next week and the next week. Just being comfortable bugging people until you get an answer, even if the answer is no. And there's actually a lot that goes into writing an email. If you're, for example, if you're trying to book a tour for your band, knowing what, going back to what we were talking about before, knowing your audience, knowing what they want to, knowing what the presenter wants to see in that email, the right amount of information that lets them know you're credible and not overwhelming them with a novel, and also, including things like a press kit, which over the course of, the last like 10 years of me sending emails, like this, that's changed. It used to be they wanted a physical, some at the very beginning, they wanted you to mail them something, physical in snail mail. And then, it became they wanted a PDF, but then everyone realized no one wanted a PDF living on their computer that's 2 gigs. And so now, they're moving to websites, just a specific dedicated EPK page on your website. So, like just knowing, getting familiar with what a presenter is looking for when you want to play at their venue, and knowing how to communicate with them. I think that's a big skill. Some light graphic design is a good thing to have in your back pocket, being so you can kind of promote yourself. Yeah, those are kind of just in terms of band leading and getting your ensembles out there. I think those are 2 big ones.
Yeah, this feels like a good place for a speed round kind of thing where there's a few things. First, something that would be great to say is taxes. If you are a 1099 type of human being, you can save yourself a lot of money by understanding what advantages you have as a 1099 person, because you certainly have a lot of disadvantages and nobody teaches you this. So there's a couple good books out there. There's one by a tax firm called Riley out of Boston that's like designed for musicians. And it's like, if you have no idea what to do with your taxes, figure that out and put that money back in your career. Another thing is if you're applying to jobs, don't underestimate the importance of a bespoke cover letter. I read so many cover letters where people just find, replace with whatever the last organization was, because the cover letter is not about you. It's about the organization you're applying to, which gets exactly to what Owen was saying about solve someone else's problem for them. That's your value. They have the decision-making power. So don't just say, I could conduct a symphony or play a concerto for you. Say, I noticed that every year you have a concerto spot with a smaller sized orchestra. I specialize in that type of thing, and I would love to fit into that series. It's like, oh, you've looked me up, you know what I'm looking to do, and you're providing me with a solution. Those things resonate with me. And then just as far as like just kind of a general thing, don't lose the things outside of music that make you interesting, because 95% of the conversations you're going to have with people that are in your audience and maybe that support your projects want to know the other things about you, and maybe they're more into baseball or whiskey or the local botanical garden than they are about the pieces you're about to perform. So if you can connect to other people about the things they care about outside of music and then bring them into your music through that, that's been a really successful strategy I found for gaining loyal audience members and supporters.
Thank you. I think just to wrap it up, we're almost at the end of the chat. You know, I think all of you guys truly care about the problems around you, and I think also you know, just constantly problem solving. How can I make this better for someone else, someone bigger than myself, you know? And I think what would you say, just on a more personal level, I guess, like why do you do what you do every single day? You know, sometimes we take a break, we need a break, everyone needs a break. But what is I guess the most important part of your life that keeps you going? Because I think it's easy, you know, for the younger people. There's so much things going on, right, around us, and it's hard to ground ourselves in this very fast-paced world right now. But for you guys, what is it for you that keeps you going every single day, that drives everything?
I'm happy to go first. I am going to say a piece of advice that I got from Marin Alsop at my first ever conducting seminar. And what she said is, the key to success in our industry is to invest 100% in the place you actually are. And I think so many of us constantly are thinking, well, how does the thing that I'm doing now set me up for the thing I hope to really be doing next? And I fell victim to that way of thinking many, many times. But the thing that I found is that if you invest fully in where you are, when it's time for you to make a step, somebody else at a place that needs the type of person that you are will notice how hard you worked at the last place. And that step, not to take away from anything anyone has said about emailing the right people or, you know, thinking about your trajectory, but that credibility that you build, that work will get noticed. And I try to think about that every day.
Yeah, John, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think those things, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think those work very well in tandem with each other. You know, making intentional choices about long-term goals, but being present with what the current moment is. You know, I totally agree, because if you're as you're thinking about the long-term goals, if you're only thinking about the future, then what you're doing is not meaningful to anyone, right? You know, it gets sloppy and pointless. So yeah, I agree. I guess trying to remember the original question.
So what is it for you on a personal level that keeps you going every day in what you do?
Yeah, for me, it is very much that I enjoy the freedom to kind of scratch different itches. I love being able to do one thing one week and do something very, very different the next, or day to day, you know. And it's pretty cool that, you know, we have that ability, you know, as just as creative people, as creative thinkers. You know, we are constantly finding opportunities, just, you know, dive deep into something that we care about. That's pretty special.
I love autonomy and being able to kind of Owen's point, scratch the itches that I'm really interested in. And I often have, it's not that I have to remind myself, but I'm lucky that there's a lot of alignment, that I genuinely believe that the things I get to work on are trying to cause good in the world. And so to see the impact is positive makes me really proud of that. Now, what I love more than anything is my family and friends. And so this type of work is allowing me to be like the best version of myself. In the current company, that was the first job I ever got, where I actually worked for like another company, meaning like a job with like a salary, and I could like commit to it versus, you know, hourly or something. That's like one of the mantras of the company from a leadership perspective. Leaders are judged by, are they empowering the other people around them to be the best versions of themselves? And so I can do the work I do every day knowing that that's what I'm getting judged by. Am I doing that for the people around me? Is my boss doing that for me? So I really believe in it, and it feels good.
Thank you so much for your time and all these amazing stories that you guys have shared. So I think we've come to the end of the Fireside Chat, and I hope that, you know, our listeners or anyone who has all these blockages in their lives could gain some really good insights. I've definitely, this is something that I need to process as well, you know, from what you guys have shared today. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time and what you're doing for your community. So
thank you, Christina, and thank you, John and Seth. You guys were great. Nice to meet you both.
You guys have a good night over there. Yeah.